Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sonny, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Sonny.
And it's real good to be here this afternoon. Yeah. When Larry called me and asked me if I would come, I told him sure. I'll do anything for a hospital and institution, because hospitals and institutions is what saved my life. The people carrying the message to those of us that couldn't get out here to hear. I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. When I was in Folsom, I remember on some Sundays, once a month, I think they would ring a bell and they would say that Alcoholics Anonymous was meeting in the library or the education building or whatever it was. And we used to laugh at the guys that was going across the yard. I never had a problem with alcohol then. I found Alcoholics Anonymous in the penitentiary, or it found me in there. And the way it found me was that I was sitting on the edge of my bunk one night. It's about 7 o'clock, 7:15, something like that. And a guy in the bed next to me jumped up and started putting his good clothes on and combing his hair and all that stuff. And I looked at him and I thought he'd flipped out, because there ain't no place to go in the penitentiary at 7 o'clock at night, especially nothing to dress up for. And I asked him what was going on, and he said, the winos are coming in tonight. Yeah. And I thought, winos? What the hell are they doing bringing winos to the penitentiary? And, it just, I couldn't understand nothing about it. So I asked him, I said, what else goes on over there? And he said, well, they have free coffee, and they bring some cookies in once in a while, and you can get some smokes. I thought, shit, I don't need none of that stuff. I got that in my locker. And I said, well, what else goes on? And they said, well, they bring in broads. And I said, what? And he said, they bring in broads. I said, how many broads? And he said, just a couple. And I said, real broads? And he said, yeah. And I want to tell you why I said that. When I got to Tehachapi, I just finished doing 11 straight years in Folsom. And just prior to that, I'd done quite a bit of time in San Quentin, and I'd done 2.5 years on death row. Altogether, I've spent 25 years in prison, and 2.5 of that was spent on death row. And so I'd seen a whole lot of guys that wanted to be women, but, weren't the real thing. And so when I asked him if they were real, he said yes. And so I said, where do you sign up? And so it was a program of attraction for me, not promotion. And it still is. I still like to look at women. And I went over there that night. I put my shades on and my yard jacket and buttoned it up at the collar, because you have to be cool. So I stumbled across there is what I did, because in Tehachapi they have grass and they got them sprinklers, and it's hard to see at 7 o'clock at night with shades on. And I got over there and I looked at them convicts sitting in that room, and I thought, man, I don't want nothing to do with these people. I've got a reputation in this penitentiary and all other penitentiaries I've been in, and I don't want it to be shot down by me sitting with these idiots, And so I got one of those metal folding chairs, and me and my ego went to the back of the room. See? And I sat down in that folding chair, and I crossed my legs, and I got that pose that cool people strike when they sit down, And I've learned since I've been sober, that's the most uncomfortable goddamn position I've ever been in, I went to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting one night, and I tried to strike that pose, and I couldn't get my legs uncrossed. It's been a while. And anyway, I walked in there, and I sat back there, and I got cool. And I heard this chatter and this laughter and all that stuff, and I heard these people talking, and all of a sudden the gate flew open, and these people came in, and there was a few convicts standing up there. And these women came in and they got to hugging on them convicts and kissing them on the cheeks. And I thought, what the shit is it? Things can't be that bad on the street. They got to come here to catch. I didn't understand none of it. And that was in 1969. And the women was wearing them short skirts. Minis, and God, I love them things, man. I found that night that you can't lean over very far in them folding chairs before you're on the floor. See? And I fell out of that chair about 4 or 5 times that night. I was real excited. I hadn't seen a lot of real women. And, I got a coffee break. They went up to the coffee machine and got coffee and everything. And I walked up there and all I did was sniff. And goddamn, the women smelled good. They didn't smell like them idiots in the penitentiary. You know what I mean? And so it kept me coming back and coming back. And then a buddy of mine told me one time, he said, Sonny, you got to get involved in this program. He said, because if you get involved, the adult authority really looks, good at this thing. And there might be a chance for you to get out. And I thought, oh, well, okay. So I found out when they had a business meeting. And I took some of my yard friends, and we went over to the meeting, and I got myself elected secretary and got them positions. See? And we took over Alcoholics Anonymous in the penitentiary. And because I thought that's the way you were supposed to do it. And they came to me, a little guy who's retired from California Department of Corrections now, a little old guy named Rex Deal. Came to me and told me, said, Sonny, you can't do it that way. And I said, oh, yeah, I can. Watch. And he said, no. You got to let these people in. And you got to do this and you got to do that. And I thought, oh, shit, man, it'll never work. And I never knew about God, see. I never knew that this was a God-centered program. And I didn't believe in God no how. As close as I ever got to God was I used to go to church on Sundays in the joint. And the reason I went was because if you went and you sat through the service, they would give you those greeting cards. See? And that was the only way you could get them. And every time I wanted one of those greeting cards, I had to go to church. And it got really tiresome because they'd only give you one. And everybody I knew that was female was down in CIW. And so those were the only people I wrote. I sent them cards. See, and it was getting tough to get these cards. And they brought a new preacher in there, a new Protestant preacher. They kept the same old Catholic one. And I met him after I got out. He's clean and sober today. He went up and worked with Cesar Chavez after he got out of the Department of Correction. He was crazy. He used to come drunk all the time. But I went in one Sunday, and this preacher caught me, and he told me, he said, Sonny, he said, I got a deal for you. And I said, what's that, man? Everybody had deals. And I said, what's the deal? And he said, I'll tell you what. He said, if you let me baptize you next Sunday out here in the yard, he said, I'll let you have all the greeting cards that you want anytime you want. And I knew that Christianity was a bunch of bull crap anyway. See? And I said, well, why do you want to baptize me? And he said, because everybody in this joint knows you. You got a reputation. And if they see you getting saved, I said, wait a minute, I'm not going to be saved, man. I don't believe in that crap. But if you want to stick me in that water so that I can come over here and get these greeting cards, I'll go for it. But you can't leave me down there too long. I don't swim. I don't have a fear of water. I just don't like my head under it too long. See? And he said, no problem. So I came over there the next Sunday, and he had one of them big old fiberglass tubs set up out there. And they had some Mexican dude standing there playing a guitar and singing them church songs. And a little step ladder to get into this tub. And that preacher was standing in that water, and he was about waist deep in that water. And he told me, come on, Sonny. And I got off in there, and he said a few words. And as he was saying them, I said, man, don't forget, don't hold my head under water too long. And he put this handkerchief over my nose and my mouth, and he stuck me under that water. And I thought, well, this is cool. And he kept me under there. I think what happened was he got carried away with his talking, see? And he forgot I was under the water. And I kicked and scratched and come up out of that water, and I punched him and knocked him out. And all I did was I went to the lockup wet. And I never did get my goddamn greeting card. But I understood those things. And, God was not real big in my life at the time. And I used to come to them meetings, and they would have step studies. And they would talk about God. And I'd tell them I want to leave. And they'd say, why? I said, I don't want to hear about your God. I don't need that shit in my life. And they would argue with me and everything. And so I went through this whole rigmarole. And every time I left the meeting, I'd go back out on the yard and I'd smoke a joint and drink some Pruno. I didn't have a problem. See, I thought the people that had problems with alcohol was people who couldn't get it. I didn't have that problem. I did not have that problem. In 1973, the adult authority at that time seen fit, because I'd been going to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd been going there enough and listening just enough to where I had some answers, so that when they asked me some questions at the board, I could run through the files in my mind and give them an answer. And they bought it. And they let me out in 1973. And the club that I rode with came to pick me up, and I left AA at the gate. I didn't need AA anymore. I rode off into the sunset. 2 years later, in 1975, I was on my way back to the penitentiary. When I left the penitentiary in 73, I weighed 227 pounds and was probably in the best shape I'd been in my life. When I came back to the penitentiary, I weighed 140 pounds. I'd been running all the time I was out there. All that alcohol that had been working for me, all those drugs that I had been using in conjunction with alcohol had quit working. And I think that everybody sitting in this room this afternoon understands what that feeling's all about. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And I hated the feelings that I was having. And I wanted to end my life. And the only way that I could think about ending my life was to have the police do it for me. And so when I came back to the penitentiary, I'd been shot in the head. I had a broken hip, and my leg was broke in 3 places, and I had my arm broke. I was trying my best to get out because I didn't want to feel what I was feeling anymore. And when they finally arrested me and brought me back, they extradited me from a town in Nebraska and brought me back out to the state of California. And they took me down to Chino and sent me before a parole revocation hearing. And I walked into that hearing and I sat down and they began to talk to me like I was some kind of an animal. And I understood that because that's how people had been talking to me all my life. And I was tired of it because I felt at that time that there was something inside of me wasn't quite ringing true with what they were saying. I didn't really feel that I was that type of person anymore. Something was wrong. And I got tired of listening to them. And I got up and walked out. And as I was walking out the door, I remember this one guy sitting on the board, the parole revocation board, telling me, Sonny, your next hearing date is in October of 1990. And I just shut it off. And I went out on the yard. And I got to looking at the fence, and I got to looking at the tower, and all that stuff. And I got to thinking, if I hit that fence, that sucker's going to shoot me. If I can make it over the first fence, I know that he'll kill me. Okay? And that's what was going through my head at the time. And then I heard an announcement over the PA system that there was an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in the visiting room. I was at RC West in Chino. And AA was not what was going through my mind at the time. But I know that there's people in this room that's been in this program long enough that understands those kinds of circumstances that happen. Those situations that happen to people like us. And I walked into that meeting, and when I walked in that meeting, there was this little short, bald-headed fat guy named Bill Honeycutt that was there. And he walked up to me and he put his arms around me and he told me, he said, Sonny, I'm glad you're here. I'm not glad you're back in the penitentiary, but I'm glad you're back in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you'll sit down and shut up and listen, this thing will work for you. And I wanted to punch that funny old man. But I realized then that the war was over. I'd lost. I didn't have anything left anymore. And I thought, shit, maybe I ought to listen. And so I was transferred from Chino back to Tehachapi. And I didn't want to go back to Tehachapi. I wanted to go back to Folsom and be just left alone. See? But they sent me back to Tehachapi. And when I got at Tehachapi, I got involved in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous up there. And the way I got involved up there was the people who come in on hospital and institutional panels. The people coming in there carrying the message. I began to hear the things that I needed to hear. A guy came in that I knew from the streets, and I thought he'd been dead for years. And he was still sober and staying on the streets. And I collared him after a meeting one night, and I told him, I said, tell me something, Joe. What the hell is it, man? What is it? Don't tell me if I don't drink, I won't get drunk. That shit don't work. I know how not to drink. I don't know how to stop. And stay stopped. And then what happens when I stop? And he told me, he said, have you got a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, Sonny? And I said, no, but I'll get one. And he said, get it. And go back when you're in your cell tonight, read that book. And if you promise me you'll read that book, I'll promise you that on my way home tonight, I'll pray to God that you understand what's in that book. And I sat there on the edge of my bunk and I read that book. And for the first time since I was 9 years old, I rolled over on my stomach and I put my face in the pillow and I cried. And I asked God to help me. I said, I don't know who you are, what you are, and I don't really give a shit. But help me. Help me. And I don't know. I got up. I went to sleep that night. I got up the next day and went on about my business. I did everything that I was supposed to do. And when people would come to me and ask me, Sonny, you want some drugs? I'd tell them no. You want a drink? No. And I started going to AA real regular. I had quit. And what had happened was that was on the 1st of July of 1976. I quit drinking and I quit using. And I remember on the 1st of July of 1977, I was standing out on the yard with some guys and we were talking. And I was saying some things to them guys that I had never, ever heard come out of my mouth. I talked about a freedom that I felt inside, even though I was locked up. And everybody that knew me knew I was locked up forever. And I went to a meeting that night, and I sat in that meeting, and some guys that worked in the bakery smuggled a cake out of that bakery. And people from the outside brought up a little old chicken shit candle, and they put it in the middle of the cake, and they sang happy birthday to me that night. I'd celebrated a year without alcohol and without drugs, without anything chemical in my body. 6 days later, I was standing at the canteen waiting for them to open up. And I was jiving with a bunch of my partners and stuff. And they announced over the PA system for me to report to the dorm and to roll my stuff up and report to R&R I was going home. And I thought they was playing a game with me. And I went up to that dorm and I collared that bull in that dorm and I told him, what's your trip, man? I'm not going home. Why are you talking this kind of trash? And he said, Sonny, they've been trying to tell you ever since January that there was a chance for you to go home. January of 1977, Governor Brown, who was governor of the state at that time, signed a bill called SB 42, which overhauled the judicial system in the state of California and done away with the indeterminate sentence and gave the power to the judge instead of the adult authority. And when they did, they reviewed all the things in your case in the joint. And when they reviewed mine, they found out under the new laws I'd done 4.5 years too much and I had to be released immediately. Now, I don't know what you call that. See? But I know what I call it. See? And I don't think what I called it at that time is the same thing that I call it at this time. Yeah. And so I walked out to the gate, the entrance building out there. And I sat out there and I shook so bad I had to sit on my hand. And I perspired so bad my T-shirt was just soaking wet. All I had on was a Town Craft T-shirt, a pair of bell-bottom Levi's, motorcycle boots. Everything that I owned in the world was in the shoebox that I carried, and if you shook that punk, it rattled. And I had a $200 check that they gave me for kick-out money. And I didn't know where I was going to go or what I was going to do. And I looked out that window, and I remembered distinctly how there was a phone booth sitting there, a pay phone booth. And I thought, man, I can go call, and I can have somebody come pick me up. And I got to thinking about it, but goddamn, I don't want to go back to that no more. I just don't want that in my life anymore. And I want to show you how hospitals and institutions work. They never told me shit. They had got real busy because there was a guy in the joint, Rex Deal in the joint had found out that I was going to be released. And he got real busy with hospitals and institutions, and they set it up so that there'd be somebody there that morning to pick me up. And I didn't know that, and I was sitting there, and all of a sudden this lieutenant come up to me and he said, "Sonny, this guy that's coming across the parking lot is here for you. He's going to take you out." And I said, "What makes you think so?" He said, "Because he looks like you." You know, and I looked out the window and I saw this guy coming across the parking lot, and he had real long hair and a big beard. And he was Carl Dake from Bakersfield. And he was a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he walked in there and he put his arms around my shoulders and he told me, "Come on, asshole, you don't live here no more." You know, and he took me out. And he took me to his home and he introduced me to his wife and his kids and his dogs and all that shit. The next night, Bill Honeycutt come and got me. And Bill Honeycutt took me down to Long Beach. And I spent my next 3 years in Long Beach with him and the people down there. 81 days after I was out, they got me involved in hospitals and institutions. I was back in the penitentiary 81 days after I was out on a pen. Yeah. So what can I tell you? You know, he took me to meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings. And I hear people in meetings today share about, "Well, I go to 2 or 3 meetings a week." I didn't know you could do that. See? I thought you had to go every goddamn day. See? When I don't go, when I miss a night that I don't go to a meeting, I feel strange. I really feel strange. Because that's the way I got my foundation. Going to meetings. And I used to tell that old fat bald-headed sucker, "Man, why can't we go do something else tonight?" You know? And he'd say, "Well, do you think that something else would keep you sober, Sonny?" And I'd have to shut up. You know, because what I had in my mind, I knew wouldn't keep me sober. You know? And I was sitting in a meeting one night, and he told me, he said, "It's time for you to get a haircut." Now, I had hair that I could sit on. And I had a beard that laid way down in here. And he told me, "It's time for you to get a haircut, Sonny." And I told him, "I don't need a goddamn haircut, man." He said, "If you don't get a haircut, you're going to get drunk." Now, I'd been out long enough to just get a taste of this program. And boy, I didn't want to go back. And I said, "Man, I never got drunk behind hair." You know, and he said, "Do what you want to." And he had that way of dealing with me. Do it any way you want to. And he'd turn around and walk off. You know? And I'd think about it, and I'd think, "Oh, shit, maybe he's right," you know. And so I told him, "Okay." And he took me to a woman's beauty shop to get my first haircut. Now, I've been in the penitentiary 25 years. I'd never been inside of a woman's beauty shop. People like me didn't go in there. They didn't have no business in there, you know. The people that went in there were kind of, you know, well, that's where they went, you know. And I got to thinking about if I go in there and somebody comes by and sees me, how am I going to explain this? People I ran with didn't drive down the street looking in women's beauty parlors, you know. But that was the thing that came over me. That was that ego and that pride and shit that you know, that we have to deal with. And I said, "Okay." And he said, "It ain't going to cost nothing. This girl, she just said she would do it for free." And I walked in there and sat down in that chair, and when she came out, I knew why she volunteered. I had beautiful long hair. This broad's hair was shorter than most men. She was jealous. I knew that she was jealous. I saw her 4 or 5 years later. She's in the program, and she explained to me what happened, and she was scared to death to cut my hair. Bill had conned her into cutting it. And she cut my hair, and he said, "While you're in that chair, you might as well let her get rid of that beard." And I said, "What for?" And he said, "It's either cut it or get drunk, man. I don't give a shit what you do." You know? And so she cut my beard. A couple of years later, I was sitting in a meeting. I'm a slow learner, thank God. I was sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you know how sometimes you just sit there and you hear people sharing, and you just tune them out and you start thinking about the shit that's going on in your life? That's what I was doing. And all of a sudden it dawned on me what he had done. I stood up in the middle of that meeting and said, "You son of a bitch." You know? And everybody turned and looked at me, and I sat back down. I felt really weird, you know? I realized what that old man had done to me, man. You know? He took away the mask. I didn't have anything else to hide behind. The only thing that was left was Sonny. And I had to deal with Sonny. That's how he dealt with me. I loved that old man. He taught me so many things, you know. And I used to just think he was an old fat dummy. You know, I really did. I used to tell him, "You're the dumbest sucker I have ever met, man." You know? And he'd just laugh at me. See? He'd just laugh at me. He said, "One of the days you're going to understand, son." He got to telling me because I was sniveling about the people in the program. I said, "I never heard so many goddamn snivellers in my life, man." And he said, "Sonny," he said, "there's no such thing as good or bad people." He said, "There's people who know and people who don't know." And I didn't understand that. And I'd go to the meetings and I'd say, "God damn, I'm sick of listening to these people. You know that's bullshit." And he'd say, "Sonny, sit down. Listen. This is the language of the heart. It's where the heart speaks and where the heart listens. If you don't hear somebody speaking from the heart, tune out. You don't have to listen. But give them the respect of sitting down and acting like you're listening." See? Because they're just as sick as you are. And I learned that over the years. I found out that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is just that. It's a program of the heart. It's where the heart speaks and where the heart listens. Listen to it when you're talking one-on-one with another alcoholic. Listen to it when you're talking to an alcoholic who's real sick, who's trying to get this program. Yeah. Listen to what you're saying. These aren't the things that you said before you got to this program. I didn't. Hey, man, if you wanted something, go get it. Don't come to me and tell me all your goddamn problems. Yeah. But today, that's the way it is. 2.5 months after I got off of death row, I was out in the yard in San Quentin, and there was a race riot, and I got involved in it, and I got stabbed twice by this black guy. And I chased him across the yard, caught him, had him down on the ground, had his head pulled back, and a knife stuck in his neck, was going to cut his head off. And one of the tower guards shot me. And I never saw that guy again. At 10 years of sobriety in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was asked to go speak at a club down on Figueroa. And it was all blacks in there. And I went in there and I walked over to the coffee pot, was getting me a cup of coffee. And this guy walked up and put his hand on my back and said, "Sonny, do you remember me?" And I looked at him and I said, "No, I really don't, man. I meet a lot of people in this program." And he told me who he was. He was that guy. And I took a birthday cake there that night and I asked him to give me the cake. He gave me my cake, and when he had his birthday, he called me and asked me if I'd come and give him his. You know, today I don't have those things going on inside of me anymore. See? That happened in that other life, in that other world, and when I come into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, it died. It took a long time, but it died. See? And today, I have a lot of good friends in my life. God, I've done everything in this program that they told me not to do. They told me, said, "Sonny, stay away from the women." And I couldn't understand that. You know, I said, "This fool's crazy. I spent all my life in prison with men, and now he's wanting me to leave women alone." You know, that's like taking a kid to the candy store and telling him you can't have none. You know, I didn't understand that. And so I got involved. And I understood what they were talking about. You know, my first involvement where the girl was kind of hectic and chaotic. She was sick too. And she gave me a ration of shit one evening. I picked her up and threw her through the kitchen window. And cops came and guy that was my sponsor at the time came and told me, Sonny, you can't do this shit anymore. You know, you can't act like this. And I told him, well, she can't talk to me like that. And he said, but you can't react like that. And I told him, what the hell am I going to do? And he said, leave him alone. And then I was sitting in a meeting on a Monday night, and I saw these women and these guys come in with the little kids and sit down in a meeting, and they were a family. And I said, that's what I need. I never had a family. So I need an old lady and a kid, a house in the suburbs, and a good job. Yeah. So I set out to that, and I got all of that. And now I know why I never had it before. I never wanted it. Our minds get away with us in this program, boy, So I left women alone for a while, and then I decided, well, it didn't work the first time. Let me try the second time, man. And so I married another bride. Sitting in a meeting, a hospital institutional meeting, and I saw this girl across the room, and I just knew it was God's will. I smiled at her, and she smiled back. And I said, what more do you want, man? And so normally what we do is, do you want to go have coffee? Well, yeah. I never understood that one, but it seemed to work all the goddamn time. And so we went and had coffee, and we dated and all that stuff. And thank God she had a sponsor that had some sense. Said, no, you guys don't marry for the first year. So we just lived together. And then we decided to get married. And we got married. And we got married in one of the big old Catholic churches. Man, there's 350 people. And we had limousines. And we had all that shit. And I was standing up at the altar. And I got to looking around at people and stuff. And I got to thinking, what the hell am I doing here, man? What's this all about? And I got to looking at her. And I got to thinking, man, I don't really feel that serious about this bride. But my head says, well, you got so much invested now, it's too late to back out, man. You might as well go for it. And so I did it, and it lasted for 2 years. And I was sitting watching a football game one Sunday afternoon, and she came in from her sponsors, and it was one of those real critical football games, and it was right at that point where they were just fixing to do something, and she walked over to the TV and turned it off. And I said, would you please turn that TV back on? And she said, no, my sponsor... I said, I don't give a shit what your sponsor said. Turn that TV back on, please, now. And she said, no. And I said, well, you better call your sponsor. And she said, what for? I said, because I'm fixing to stick you in that son of a bitch. And you better get somebody to get you out of it. And then I remembered what that first sponsor told me, that I couldn't do that. So I got up and walked out and got in my car and drove off. Haven't been back since. She filed for divorce. No problem. Everything's okay. And then she got married again. And I thought, somebody said, do you feel bad about that thing? I said, the only thing I feel bad for is that guy that you married. And I said, no, I'm glad she's gone, man. And so I haven't fooled with it anymore, because there's an old lady that used to be in this program who, God bless her soul, has passed on. Her name was Ruth M. And she's from down in Downey, in Paramount, in that area down there, old girl from the South. And we were sitting in a restaurant one night talking, and I said, man, I know, God's will for me is to have another girl in my life. And she looked at me and she said, Sonny, whoever told you God was a pimp? That old lady had a way of telling me things, you know what I mean? She didn't have no communication problems at all. And so I started spending time with her. I'd take her whenever she had to go speak and stuff like that. And I just spent a lot of time with her. And I learned a lot of things. Thank God. I learned a lot of things about women, And then I began to have women friends. I got some women friends. I found out that if you take them flowers, they appreciate it, But they don't want shit off of other people's yards. I told you I'm a slow starter, man. I don't come out of the gate hardly at all. And I remember one time this girl who was brand new in the program, she was sitting next to me. She was in her first 30 days, probably about her first 15 days, and she was sitting next to me. And all of a sudden, you know how them feelings and them emotions hit us when we're brand new and we think we're going stone nuts? That's what happened to her, and she jumped up and bolted out of that meeting and ran outside, and I went out after her and I got her. And I set her down and I talked to her through it and everything. And we became good friends. You know, one day she called me and told me she was having a hard time. And so I said, okay, I'll be over in just a little bit. And she was a manicurist. She done fingernails. And so I stopped at the flower store on the way over and I picked up some of those yellow roses. You know. And I took them over there to her. And she was real happy about them. And I sat down at her table there. And she was talking to me. And she said, well, while you're sitting here, let me do your nails. I said, no. Don't get ignorant, man. We'll be good friends for a long time. Don't get stupid, man. You know. And she said, no, let me do them. If you don't like it, she said, we'll take the shit off and then you can leave. And I said, no. As soon as you do that, somebody's going to walk in here that knows me. You know. I said, no. And she said, please, come on. If you don't like it, I'll take it off. I said, all right. And so I went for it. Well, she'll feel better. And she went and done my nails. You know, I don't know how many men in here has had their nails done and how many of you haven't had your nails done, but if you've never had them done, do it. There ain't a better feeling in the goddamn world, man. You know, now I know why these brides spend so much money on their nails. That's a good feeling. You know, they pull them and all that and massage your hands and stuff. I thought, shit, that's all right. You know, and I let the stuff stay on there. You know, I just kept my hands in my pockets a lot. And I started going back every week and getting them done. One day, I was in North Hollywood and I had to run over and get them done because I had to meet a newcomer at the Radford group. And, you know, if any of you's ever been to Radford, you know that all them old geezers sit out on the bench out front of Radford out there. And they just take everybody's inventories. And they watch the broads go by. And the reason I know that is because I used to sit there. See? And I went in a real hurry and got my nails done. And I told her, I said, I ain't got time for you to dry them. I got to get back real quick. I got to meet this newcomer. And I wasn't thinking. And I run up there and I parked my car illegal like I usually did. And I jumped out and I started to run across there. And one of the guys from the bench jumped up and said, Sonny, how you doing? And he reached to shake my hand. I said, no, my nails are still wet, man. And, all them old geezers just fell out, man. And that was the last of my ego, about my nails. The secret was out. Sonny gets his nails done, and it's just a trip, man. All the things that's happened to me in my life in sobriety. How much time is left? About 15. 15, 18 minutes? 18. I love being sober today. I love what God has done with my life, man. It's so fantastic. I moved from Los Angeles down to Palm Springs.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. And let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
And thought that was God's gift down there, but there was always something missing in my sobriety down there. People weren't as busy or as active in anything down there, And I've had the opportunity, thank God, through this program to speak in a lot of different places all over the country, and that's was a saving grace for me. And about 3 months ago, I had a real major heart attack. And my doctor told me that I would have to slow down and I'd have to take it easy for a while. And so I left the desert and I went up to Victorville to some friends of mine who live up in Victorville, and I spent a couple of weeks up there with them. And while I was up there, they live in a little community called Spring Valley Lake. And they have a 7.5 mile shoreline lake in there, man-made lake. It's really nice. And I saw a house on the lake that I really liked, and so I put a bid in on it. They accepted the bid, and I bought it. And I just moved up there a couple of weeks ago. And I can sit on my back porch and fish. Yeah, it's really neat. And I got a boat. You know, I can get out and play on the lake. All that stuff. And the first morning that I slept in my new house, I woke up. The curtains were drawn in the master bedroom, and the master bedroom looks out over the lake. And I walked out on the veranda out there and was watching the ducks in the lake. And thought, God damn, how'd I get here? How'd I get here? By this program. You people. And the things that I've learned here. That's how I got there. I know that today. I know that today. Yeah. Just before I came over here, I called my sponsor. And I told him, I said, I'm having a great time. And he said, well, don't lie and screw it up. And I haven't. I've told you the truth. See, because I don't know what else to do. Too many people has heard my story. You know? And they've got tapes and all that crap. You got to get honest, you know what I mean? But I love what's happened in my life. What I've done is I've learned how to date. Man, I didn't know there was such a chore. I really didn't. Because I knew absolutely nothing about dating. Maybe you people done that. I didn't. You know, my friend talked about taking hostages. That's all I ever did. And if one of my buddies came over and he had a transmission that I needed for my motorcycle and he liked my old lady and I didn't have the money to buy the transmission, I'd trade him. My life's a whole lot different today. I found out women don't like that. The first date I went out on, I was so nervous. She was in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we went out. We went to a show, went to dinner. And I took her home, kissed her on the cheek and said good night. And I left. I ain't home 10 minutes and the phone rang. And I said, yeah, and it's her. And she said, did I say something wrong or did I do something wrong? And I said, no. I thought I had a great evening. She said, well, it was really strange the way you left. And I said, well, that's what they told me you were supposed to do. But I'll be over in just a minute. You know, but I didn't go. I stayed home. I have to learn things, man, the hard way. You know? And today, you know, I got a lot of women friends. We go places, do things. We go shopping together. You know, they teach me how to buy clothes. You know, women has taught me a lot of things in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, a lot of things. And they taught me how to buy that foo-foo shit that you put on after you shave and stuff. I didn't even know you were supposed to do that. You know, I mean, they taught me all that stuff. And today normally I go to have my hair done, and I go to them women's beauty parlors. That's where all the women are at, man. You know, I like sitting there getting my hair done and checking the bras getting their hair done. You know, and I tell them, God, that looks really good. You know, they like that. You know, my life has changed completely, man. It's changed completely. You know, I'm not what I was when I came here. You know, I'm not what I was when I came here. Thank God. You know, I've been a lot of places in this world. A lot of places in this world. But where I'm at right today is where I want to be. Amongst people who are just like me and doing the same goddamn thing I'm doing. Trying to stay sober a day at a time. For those of you that are new, or nearly new, those of you that's having a hard time, I want to tell you something that Ann Hardy shared with me when I first got out of the penitentiary. And that was that if you don't drink, you don't use, and you don't run, no matter what comes down in your life today, you never have to go back to that misery that you came from. Thank you for having me here today.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. To obtain additional copies, receive a free catalog of AA and Al-Anon talks, or to find out about our tape and CD of the Month Club, call Encore Audio Archives at 1-800-878-1308, or visit our website at www.12steptapes.com.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs, long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down. And then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.